Takeout means that you have to wipe out their homes where they came from. You have to absolutely wipe them out. It's the only way you're going to stop terrorism.
Donald Trump talking tough about taking out the terrorists and their families and seeing a dramatic spike in the polls. And we're back now with the panel. Well, take a look at the latest survey, which is pretty striking. In a CNN national poll, Donald Trump now leads with 36%. That's more than double anyone else in the field. And when it comes specifically to the issue of fighting ISIS, Trump is at 46%, swamping all the other candidates. George, with intense focus now on taking out the terrorists, why do you think voters are flocking to Trump?
Well, we're now in a sort of second stage of Trumpiness, in the sense that the first he was naughty and he was entertaining and he would say these things that people said, gosh, you can't say that in polite society. Isn't it wonderful that someone will talk like that? Now the American people are more frightened and they're looking for strength, and they tend to equate naughtiness with strength, that he stands up to.
Well, some would say it's not naughtiness, it's toughness.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that is now taken to be kind of synonymous, that they're effectively the same thing. What this means is, if this lasts in this volatile year, usually the Republican race comes down to a sort of conservative base candidate and the centrist establishment candidate. What if this time there are three candidates? Then you're going to get a plurality winner, and the plurality path is Trump's path to the nomination.
Juan, it is striking, though, that Trump's tough rhetoric is winning out at this point, at least in the polls, over senators who've had foreign policy experience and governors who may not have dealt with foreign policy but have had hands-on experience dealing with crises. The rhetoric seems to be winning out.
I don't think there's any question. I think it speaks to a deficit on the part of President Obama. I thought that press conference he had in Turkey, I was just talking about this with Julie, I just thought he missed the sense of the American people, which is fear. Now, you don't want to feed fear. I'm not advising that on any part. I think people can exploit fear to negative ends. But you have to reflect when the populace feels that there's a real reason to have fear. I think he didn't do that back then. I think the Republicans have been thoroughly critical of him on this point. I think he is out of line when he speaks to the Republican candidates. I think that's really not the concern here. But when you come to Donald Trump and just what George was saying, this kind of strong approach, lacking with specifics or anything new. There's no specific plan that he has that he would execute that the president, the FBI, the agencies aren't doing. But he seems strong and competent and capable and commanding.
So in the same sense that some people think that Obama was the opposite of Bush, and that's why they elected him in 2008, you're nodding that Trump is the opposite of Obama?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Obama's election as somewhat of a reaction to not only George Bush's policies, but also his style, then Trump seems to be a reaction to Obama. We're veering back in another direction.
Whether it's relevant to the war on terror or not, we're also seeing this week a renewed debate over gun control. Take a look at this. I can tell you that Hillary Clinton was very much for gun control, and that Ted Cruz was very much against it, and said instead of taking away the guns from the to fight the bad guys, we should be using the guns against the bad guys. Brit, you know, it's interesting. Ever since Al Gore in 2000, Democrats on the national scene in national elections have stayed away from gun control, have not found it to be a winner. Do you expect Hillary Clinton to play gun control hard in the general election, or is she just going to use it against Bernie Sanders, who comes from a conservative hunting state like Vermont, to use it in the primaries, but not necessarily in the general election against the Republicans?
If I were a Republican strategist, I would hope fervently that she carries forward her crusade for gun control right into the general election. It is a political loser for Democrats. It has gotten them in trouble nearly every time they've tried it. Even after Newtown, when there was thought to be some sort of big new national consensus for sensible gun control, as it was called, the measure that was introduced never went anywhere in the Congress and was an utter failure by President Obama. It's sort of a startling and striking failure on his part. So these are measures that, you know, if you look at them, most of the ones that are being talked about, they wouldn't have solved the problem that led to what happened in San Bernardino, and they can't pass anyway. So.
And why do you think that gun control, particularly when we're talking now, not in an individual race, an individual state, But in a race for president nationally, why is it a loser for
It's a
Democrats?
loser because of the fervor with which people who support the Second Amendment as it has been interpreted by the Supreme Court and use guns or own guns or believe that guns should be freely owned, basically, is greater than the fervor of the gun control advocates. And these people will vote on a single issue basis. The lobby that supports these rights is effective, and the Democrats just don't have the firepower on this issue, no pun intended, to make it work for them. And they haven't for a long, long time.
You don't think it's the NRA?
That's what I said.
It's the NRA and the gun manufacturers.
Well, it's also, you know what makes them powerful? The sentiment of the American people.
No, it's the money that they raise
so
from
the people who
extremists.
answer in polls that they don't want this are doing so because they're paid?
No, the polls indicate that most Americans want background checks. They want the loopholes closed.
I want to bring in Julie, because it is clear that President Obama is going to raise the issue of gun control in every case, whether it's a mass shooting where it seems very applicable or a calculated terror attack where it may not be so applicable. Do you expect him to do anything more than talk about it, but in the rest of his presidency? And at the White House, do they think that this is a political winner, particularly, let's say it's Hillary Clinton as the nominee in 2016?
I think in terms of actions, there's a definite effort to look at more executive actions that the president can do. They've basically given up on Congress. There's not going to be a push for legislation. But he's going to look at trying to expand background checks, trying to close what the so-called gun show loophole, online purchases. There's a lot of legal questions around that, and I think that you're not going to see anything by the end of this year, perhaps into next year. They look
Which
at the
will undoubtedly be caught up in the courts and won't end up.
Absolutely, like immigration and
Right.
some of the other executive actions. On the politics, they look at it a little bit differently, and they think that it's a base motivator for Democrats in the same way that it's a base motivator for Republicans. And they think that if it's Hillary or whoever it's going to be, that Democrats do have a platform to stand on.
George, final thought?
It's not just the fervor of the NRA members, which is considerable. It's not just the gun manufacturers, who are a trivial part of our economy. Gun ownership is a cultural signifier. Someone who comes out against gun ownership is coming out against hunting culture, is coming about small town America. There's a whole plethora of indicators that people take from forcing gun control.
And we should point out that the president of Liberty University this week said he carries a gun, and maybe everybody else should as well. Interesting times. Thank you all, panel. See you next week.